Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Very excited for our next two segments. Our focus with this show is always to provide some really good, concrete information that you can use to help in your own college process. We're not focusing on any specific type of institution. This is not a podcast designed to help you get into your local public any more than it's designed to help you get into an Ivy or a small liberal arts college. We are equal opportunity, and we want students to look for their best fit. There is no question that we certainly have lots of listeners with aspirations for some of the more selective schools in this country. And there's a topic that we talk about from time to time called the distinguishing excellence. And we haven't talked about it in a while, and we thought it would be a good time to come back to it. I'm very excited to welcome my colleagues, Amy Alexander, who's a former Yale admissions officer, and Zaragoza Guerra, who's a former MIT and Caltech admissions officer, and I myself am a former University of Pennsylvania admissions officer. So we've all worked at institutions that are highly, highly selective. And that's where this distinguishing excellence terminology comes into play. And it's actually a term that Harvard uses around their committee table when they are talking about applicants to the institution, sort of what's their distinguishing excellence. And so the three of us are going to talk to you today about a distinguishing excellence. And I'm going to kick it off with a really basic question, and that is, what is a distinguishing excellence? And Zaragoza, why don't you kick us off on that question?
Yeah, I think a distinguishing excellence is kind of almost star quality within an application. It is students' ability to really go above and beyond what an admission officer might normally see within an application, and really demonstrate how they've immersed themselves within their interests, within their passions, and have really tried to share that interest and that passion with as many people as possible. I like to think of it as not necessarily a distinguishing excellence, but a student's ability to really share their joy, the love of what they're doing with as many people within their community as they can.
Amy, anything that you would add to that?
Yes, thank you for asking. I was going to say, Zaragoza, is exactly what I would say, but I would add the students I've worked with over the last 30 years doing this tend to be students who get there intrinsically, naturally. When we talk to families, which we do every day, some families and students as young as 7th, 8th graders, and they're asking us about, how to prepare for high schools that we could prepare possibly for a highly selective college admissions. And we'll talk about the DE, or distinguishing excellence. And they think it's something that they can strategize or plan or map out or force parents and their children or the students themselves. Maybe a little bit, but generally speaking, no. The students I've worked with that actually do have that star quality, they don't try. It's just who they are. They tend to be students who are ridiculously motivated, take incredible self-initiative, are disciplined, dedicated, and just go after things at a level that your average student does not.
Right. And I would add, they're interested in a way that the average student, and quite honestly, the average person, like, let's be real, I didn't have a distinguishing excellence when I was in high school, is not. And I couldn't agree more that it's really intrinsic. Way back in 2010, a admissions officer at MIT actually wrote a blog. I wanted to give his name. His name's Chris Peterson, but he wrote a blog about applying sideways. And it comes up for us with some regularity, because it really gets at exactly what you guys are saying, which is it's a student going out and figuring out, how can I pursue this thing that I'm so interested in? How can I use it in different ways to help the people around me, or, just engage with the world around me. And students who do that, who focus on doing that because it's interesting to them, not because it's going to look really good on their application, those are the students who tend to come out at the other end of it with some really compelling interests in things that they've done, versus simply, well, like you say, I'm going to map this out. I'm going to do this freshman year. I'm going to do this sophomore year. I'm going to do this junior year. And then when I apply, poof, all of a sudden, I'm going to have my pick of all of the most selective schools in the country. Right? It doesn't really work like that.
It's almost as if a student doesn't necessarily do these things to get into a school. They're going to a school so that they can continue doing the things that they're doing.
Yes, that is a brilliant distinction, I think.
Yeah. And, Beth, you were saying, well, you didn't have that in high school. And I was, it's funny, I forget, but I was thinking back, I did have one. I was a competitive swimmer. I still am. I can't seem to let it go. And that shows you I still compete at a pretty high level in what's called a U.S. Masters swimming 40 years after graduating from college.
Right.
But what the dean of admissions, who I went back and worked with him for a number of years after I graduated from Yale, I started at a young age. I took weekends where I could have been doing other things with friends or whatever. And I was swimming, and I went to swim meets, and I traveled around the country. I went to Israel. I went to Puerto Rico. I mean, out of the country. And I did it because I did it, not to get into college. I would have done it no matter what. But what the dean told me when I got to the admissions office, when I applied for the job, he said, I remember you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, because, I went to the Maccabiah games. I won some medals. I did well. He said, no, because you actually started a program, NC2A, Big Brother, Big Sister program. You took New Haven area youth, you and 6 other, high level athletes from different sports, and you started a program in the New Haven community and brought these students onto campus, mentored, tutored them, taught them about education, got them interested in engagement. You also taught underserved New Haven area students, young people, how to swim. You took it beyond. You didn't just have that, which was wonderful in and of itself, but you went a step further. And that's what I tell when I get a lot of the athletes that come to Bright Horizons. And I love working with them. And I'm like, well, what else can you do? It's great. You're a great athlete. It takes a lot of time. You don't have to add a lot. But where can you lean in and do more?
Right, right. And I would also add, knowing you, that other piece was pretty intrinsic for you as well, because you still do things like that in your community with underserved populations. So I think, look, we have examples then, right, from our own people. I had things that I would consider were a little softer. I would not consider anything that I did rising to the level of a true distinguishing excellence. So I'm not going to share any of my high school accomplishments, but, I think when we think about, I think this is as good a time as any to share some examples of things that our students have done. And Zaragoza, I'm curious if you have, any that come to mind for you that really did sort of happen pretty intrinsically. And I think one thing I would love for our listeners to take away from this is that there are many different ways to achieve a distinguishing excellence. And there are many different areas that you can achieve one in, right? So an athlete is a pretty common distinguishing excellence. You're a recruited athlete. You're recruited to swim for the team or to, throw a ball, and you're going to start freshman year. But there are many other types of distinguishing excellence. And so Zaragoza, any examples that leap to mind for you?
Yeah, one of my favorite reads, in terms of a student who I helped in terms of their essays and in terms of all the things that they were able to divulge within their application, is a student who was interested in aeronautical engineering. And everything that she did with gusto, and you could tell she had a passion for this. And she had a passion for serving her country as well. So it was kind of this combination of, I want to go into aerospace engineering because I do want to serve my country. I want to go into the military. And, she applied ROTC as well as to the service academies and got into some incredible schools. um, because of that love. And it was effusive. So it wasn't just simply, hey, I'm interested in going into ROTC. I'm I'm going to join my Civil Air Patrol and I'm going to teach other students aeronautical engineering within that Civil Air Patrol. I'm going to spend time at the Service Academy and get a feel for what it's like there. I'm going to learn how to fly and uh, took flying lessons, and I'm going to immerse myself within tech. And she came up with these wonderful ideas, not just within the Science Olympiad, that she took on over into the research arena, and she um, got in a research mentor at a university and studied the effects of cell phone usage on the brain, and did this whole research project on brain tumors. And it was all encompassing. I mean, that's just one aspect. Everything that she did with gusto. She was very involved in her Indian community, both in dance and in mission work. And that, was trying to give back to her country was her way of saying thanks for U.S. for, taking in my parents and, giving us all these incredible opportunities. I want to give back. And you could see that throughout her application.
Right. One thing that strikes me, I've often spoken to people about this concept of a spark, right? So there are tens of thousands of students applying to each of the most selective schools in the country every year, many of whom are highly accomplished in the classroom. They've got phenomenal grades. They've taken incredibly rigorous classes. If they've taken test scores, the test scores are really high. They do some things outside of the classroom, right? They're the kinds of students that other people say, you're going to have all the choices in the world. And then it's always so surprising to them when they don't. And I think the reason for that is because there are so many super qualified students in these applicant pools. And it's important to note that all of these students that we are talking about today and the examples that we give, they're all those kinds of students plus, right? And that's the key. And so when we talk about, I always say, well, there's a spark, and I know it when I see it. The spark is what you're talking about, Zaragoza. And Amy, I'm curious if you have an example that might highlight maybe a different type of spark.
Yes, I have a great counter. As I was listening to you speak, Beth, I was thinking about this young woman I worked with a few years ago, and she had what I would consider kind of an unassuming, modest spark. She wasn't like, I'm leading this, I'm putting myself out there. I just was in awe of her, and she just didn't even realize how good she was. She was interested in pre-med and or business. She wasn't sure, but she had a very analytical mind. And when we were brainstorming for her essay, she said, I don't know what to write about. Should I write about my interest in, I take all these STEM classes and I've done some things in the summers. And I'm like, well, that's okay. But, and we got to talking and just schmoozing. And she started telling me about sophomore year, how she would take the bus every Sunday to go visit her grandmother in an elderly assisted living home. And her relationship was very important. And she, it was just something she did. I mean, it was just, so she would go, she'd bring some nail polish and she would be painting her grandma's nails. And then a couple of the other elderly people would come and sit by the side and would talk to her. And lo and behold, a few months later, all these elderly women wanted their nails painted, but more than that, they wanted to have a connection with a young person. Yeah. So she then recruited the dozens. I mean, it went slowly. I'm going quickly, but like it was 24 by the end. She created a small club, a group. And what they learned, they shared, and she ended up really building a skill and an interest in geriatric medicine, and possibly listening to these elderly people and their issues and ailments and how people don't hear them. And what they learned, the young people, they'd get back on the bus and talk as if they're talking about their girlfriends. And it became a huge interest of hers, but it was so unassuming. And if someone couldn't go, she made sure she got a volunteer or someone else to fill in. I mean, this became like a club, a business that she took very seriously. And she had, not quite president, vice president, but people who were in charge, because the elderly people expected them to come and to have a partner and connection. So she learned, although she's more of a STEM kid, she said her communication skills and her softer skills, empathy, grew exponentially. So this, to me, every time I talked to her, she just had just a huge heart. And I can imagine her being I would want her to take care of my aunt or grandmother or grandfather someday, because I would want her to be that person. And I thought, she's the type of kid who deserves, who would be plucked.
Right, absolutely. And what I really love about that example is that didn't require money, right? This is not an example of a student with a lot of opportunity and parental backing. This is someone who got on a bus every weekend and went and did this. So for the price of a bottle of nail polish and bus fare, right? And I love that, because I do feel like there is also, and there can be, and I have a few examples, and the students are really lucky and they've had some great opportunities in their life and they've made the most of them, but not everyone has those kinds of opportunities. But that doesn't mean a distinguishing excellence is out of reach. We're going to take a really quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to keep talking about this. So to our listeners, don't go away.